vehicle we have, while it is not under under the threat of being yanked out of, being a frontline vehicle from CARB, we have had a number of issues with it. It's a 2005 vehicle that we believe has been probably underrated since day one in terms of the weight for the load that those trucks carry when they're full of wet chips from trimming and chipping. So because we were able to obtain quotes that were at such a lower cost than we had originally anticipated, we did, as an option for council consideration, also to request to replace that third truck. That 2005 vehicle has cost us over $20,000 in repairs in the last 3 years alone. So we just would like to see the fleet improved both on the safety side as well as be obviously in compliance with the California Air Resources Board. We do have some additional equipment replacement funds that are available to cover should you choose to buy 3 vehicles, to cover that difference over the $400,000. As you guys know, our mechanics squeeze every mile they can out of all of our vehicles. This is just one of those situations where we're not able to retrofit. In a year, we won't have these aerial trucks. And again, as with any of our larger vehicles, there's a 12-month lead time on it. So we're here in front of you tonight to try to get ahead so we don't find ourselves without the ability to do all the things that these crews do with those vehicles. I am happy to be the director standing here with her feet firmly on the ground and not the girl in the bucket in these trucks, but also know that we need them and would like to, give the crews the right tools to continue to do the thing that they choose to do. So, if you have any questions.
Questions for staff? Okay, I have some.
Okay.
What are the consequences of not following the CARB guidelines?
Daily fines.
And when we sell these vehicles off at surplus, are they going to be sold to somebody in state or out of state?
They cannot be used within the AQMD management district, so they go out of state.
Okay. Because I was going to say, if they're in state, then what's the point?
Right.
Okay.
And then so the question that we always visit is grants, because we always talk about applying for them someday.
Correct. Equipment grants for these kinds of vehicles are tough to get. We talked, the latest one that we talked about, and it probably kind of sounds like old news now, but we really tried to collectively take a look at all of these pieces of equipment that we knew had to go away, and went after the Carl Moyer grants. This wasn't necessarily something that qualified because it's on-road, not off-road. However, the challenge that we have is lots of times we find that some of the other industries are beating us out in terms of mileage that we're putting on it versus idle time. In the situation of an aerial truck, you have a lot more idle time than you do drive time throughout the city. So,
well, just so that we have the facts, October 22nd, 2018, the U.S. EPA awards $9.6 million in grants to reduce harmful diesel emissions in California, and these are for cities. First, California plans for $415 million to fund clean trucks. That was September 28th. There's a bunch of different. Here's CARB announces more than $200 million in funding for clean freight transportation. Now, obviously, this isn't freight, but there's so many different, and even over, like in 16, 17, the millions of dollars that were given towards 2 cities. And I'm just going to say, for 2 years, next month is going to be 2 years. I've heard us talk about our opportunities and us possibly getting grants, but I haven't seen I don't know. I don't think that we're trying hard enough. because we are at a place where we need money. And so even if it's only $50,000, even if it's only 20 towards one of these trucks, that'll be 20 times 2 or 20 times 3.
Right. And in this case, and I'm going to have to ask Mr. Charles Russell, the vehicles that we're replacing are gasoline vehicles, not diesel vehicles. They are diesel, but we were replacing them with gasoline. Got it. So, if you couldn't hear Charles, so the reason that they went to the gasoline in this case, they did go after some savings because the diesel vehicles are about $40,000 per vehicle more. However, I absolutely agree. We actually have been making grabs at everything that we know about. I know that we are looking at millions of dollars in terms of water and sewer grants right now. These smaller ones, you're right, we haven't necessarily been successful getting.
So I'm not going to sit up here anymore and just talk about it. I'm not going to vote for them until I see a little bit more effort in getting grants.
Okay?
So you said that this is an on-road versus an off-road,
Correct.
but there are grants for on-road as well as off-road.
Okay.
So Carl Moyer provides both on and off-road at any, sometimes at the same time, sometimes not at the same time. We've had this discussion a lot of times. I just wonder if, you say we haven't been successful, but how hard have we tried? If you paint the picture, if you paint the correct picture, then AQMD is not going to deny what they advocate. It just seems to be a continuous conversation without any results.
Well, and I can tell you, we put major effort into the last Carl Moyer. And we're, as I mentioned before, we talked to them multiple times, let them know what the condition of the city was in. This is related to off-road, not these. And it was at the time, the farming industry and the farm implements and were just winning out in terms of the points and the scoring. We weren't even hitting the threshold because most of the vehicles, again, because we squeezed so many miles out of them, were already limited to their 100 hours a year that we're trying to replace. So it was hard to compete with something that's running 24/7. But we have made the effort.
Sometimes being a disadvantaged community trumps a lot of the other issues that other cities might be getting their funding for. So in today's market, disadvantaged community trumps mostly everything.
Well, happy to take another stab at it.
I just think that in your department especially that we have so many opportunities, and it would really be advantageous for you to look into having someone that specifically is hired for writing grants for you, because they could be a contracted person that pays for themselves. It would pay for itself. And I think we've talked about it so many times that we need to do it. We've got to do it. Even if you got somebody in your department, but there's so many opportunities that I feel like we've missed, or whatever the reason is. I'm going to chime in, but I'm going to go a different direction. But I happen to agree with what my colleague said here. Several years ago, and I believe it was before I got on council, we had looked at contracting tree trimming. Mm-hmm. And with the overall increase in OPEB and PERS costs, I think it's time we look at that again
and just really do an adequate study of what some of these things would cost to contract with a private company to do it, considering the cost of the equipment that we need to replace and all of the unfunded mandates that do come down from air quality and from the state. I think it's time to take a look. I mean, we've got to make an intellectual decision on whether we're going to go forward with these things, because there's no guarantee what the state is going to do with carbon emission. And it's time to take advantage of the fact that we are a disadvantaged city. So I would suggest that. Going back, you did answer one of my questions with the lead time of 12 months, and I understand it takes a long time to build these things. But if we can push that cost off on a private company and save money for the city at the same time, I think we owe it to everybody to look at that.
Chris, in the background section of your staff report, you talk about the fact that we'll be out of compliance, and unless I'm missing it, I don't see the time frame for that. Where
January 1, 2020.
2020. Okay. Oh, okay. My bad. So we're up against a ticking clock, and we have basically a year to do what I hear my colleagues suggesting. From your perspective, as the person responsible for getting all these things done, what's the practicality that we can nurse this equipment along and do some of the research that has been suggested here tonight to try again for grants or look at the feasibility of contracting?
The equipment itself can absolutely be nursed along. We would prefer not to pull the 2 trucks off the road on January 1st, 2020. So the biggest challenge is just not having a vehicle that we're able to do the work with on January 1st if we haven't placed an order and if the manufacturers can't meet the delivery timeline. And that's the biggest challenge for us, is we just won't have trucks to put people up into trees in, or to hang banners, or...
And the feasibility, we heard, I forget what event I was at, but there was a presentation done. I think San Jacinto College has got a very assertive program with interns, trying to get interns placed into employment opportunities. And I'm just wondering if, because I'm always sensitive to the fact that you're running at minimum staffing and there's only so many hours in the day and so many things that have to get done.
Right.
That we might be able to look into an internship program to get somebody to do the research on some of these grants
Sure.
so that you don't have to do it.
Right.
And it would be a good opportunity for an intern to get some real world experience. Just a thought.
WRCOG too, remember.
Right.
WRCOG offers grant writing assistance. They have money for that they offer to their member agencies
Right.
to provide that service, and I think it's a travesty that we aren't taking advantage of that, something free, when it seems to be such a bottleneck for us otherwise.
So I think you've been beat up on grants enough. So I'm not going to go there. I'm going to go in another direction.
Okay.
So Linda went in another direction. I'm going to go in another direction. The mandate that's being put forth that's going to take these trucks off the road in 2020 is from the California Air Resources Board, which is a group of unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats that are appointed by the governor. Okay. So, yeah, so I wanted to make that point first. Secondly, how long, if we purchase these diesels, so we already know the price of diesel's going up.
These are
Oh,
gasoline.
these ones are gas.
Correct.
Okay, so we're going to save a couple cents a gallon on gas because we already know diesel's going through the roof. But let me ask you this. How long are these going to be able to be on the road? Because the California Air Resources Board is already talking about reducing even lower emissions levels by 2030. So are these going to last? So are we not looking at electric vehicles? Because that's the way everything's going in California.
Or CNG, right?
So, so my question is, if we purchase these, are we going to get our money's worth? Because here we are, a smaller city in California, being mandated by a board of unelected officials because the people of California want to go this direction of making everything super green, except they don't take in consideration when there's a wildfire, all the carbon emissions that have been saved are now put into the atmosphere with one wildfire for 10 years. So how long are these going to last, these new vehicles, if we purchase them today and they come into service in a year? Are they going to be already 10 years behind this $500,000 cost?
So I obviously don't have the answer to that. I can't guess what's going to happen. I don't anticipate that gasoline vehicles are going to be scrutinized as much as even like the low sulfur diesel, which is probably what they're coming after next, would be my guess. I can tell you in terms of from an operational perspective and the talent that I have on my fleet, if they'll let us drive it, we'll make it last 20 years. So I can give you that much, but I can't tell you where the environmental piece of it's going.
Well, that's the thing, is it's going to be taken off the road in 5 or 10 years.
I can't imagine. I mean, historically what we've seen is you've got about a 20-year mark on diesel vehicles since they've really kind of started hammering down on this stuff. So
Well, we'll see. The
It's a
news
guess.
is still out on that. Okay. So, any other questions for staff? This is a discussion action item. Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment? Good evening, Pat.
Hi. What I didn't hear is that why couldn't she purchase one? Why do we have to purchase both? Because if we need one to hang up the banners and trim some trees, because we can also then do what Linda said and outsource for trimming trees and do that. But if it's not till 2020, we don't. I mean, she said she already saved the money, so it's already there. And why can't we just buy one to save? And then, I don't know, that's just my realistic approach to this, is that I didn't hear any of you say, well, we could buy one and then go with that so we could still get the banners hung and some of the trees, and then also outsource for tree trimming, because we do have a company that does, I know they do the greenery around my housing tract. So we already have a maintenance crew that comes out that does trim trees and does all that. That's just my suggestion, that what I'm hearing is, if she's saying that she's already got the money, it's already there, we don't need to purchase two, maybe we just purchase one for now. And then see where it goes, and then talk about what the mayor said, in the future. But still, we're not limiting to then we end up with nothing. So.
Thank you. And I'm sure you have an answer for that. And I know that we've got 3 crews. If we buy one, then we've got 2 crews that.
if we have 3 crews of 2 guys, so if we eliminate one, we will have 2 crews of 3 guys. Just be a little less getting done with 2
Or
vehicles.
we have a day shift, a swing shift, and a night shift that I'll drive one truck.
You would have some negotiations for that, but you may very well have that.
Okay. Are there any other comments from the public? All right, seeing none. Bring it back to council.
I want to know what the city manager thinks.
I think we would have to weigh the purchase of 3 vehicles against some combination of contracting out and operating in-house. And so take a look at it from a cost effectiveness. That's my opinion.
So I know you need there's a year lead time. If it was to be approved today, delivery would be when?
November, probably beginning of December next year, so a month before the deadline.
So how about if maybe one is approved and then we come back with what the city manager talks about? Just a thought. And we bring this back at another council meeting. Comments from the council?
What would you see as a time frame, Alan, to do the necessary study on cost analysis on this?
Chris?
You're up, Chris.
How long would it take you to do the study that's necessary? Could we even make the December? We're probably looking at the January meeting. So, we're looking at the January meeting. He's bobbleheaded, yes.
January.
He could have a study.
So the direction we're going now is try to bring something back in January. If we approve it now in November, it would be November or December that we could have the vehicle available. If we take that action in January, we're right up against the CARB deadline to take them out of service.
Yeah.
So I'm not opposed to looking at a hybrid solution to this, and that we approve one vehicle, get that ordered, because there's always going to be circumstances and situations where having something in-house, having a crew in-house and the equipment in-house to do the services that we need in times of catastrophic events, contracting out, there's no guarantee that you're going to get those resources when you need them. So if we had a tremendous windstorm here and we needed to deploy that equipment, having it in-house and having the crews in-house, even with just one vehicle that would be appropriately serviceable, would be an advantage. So I'm leaning more in favor of let's secure one, let's get that started, and look at these other options downstream. So we're not right up against the deadline of January 2020. That's my thoughts.
Let me ask the grant wizard over here. If you found a grant within the next few weeks that would pay for one or more of these, how long would it take to get a guarantee of funding?
Well, fortunately, Carl Moyer and those EPA grants don't take nearly as long as State Water Resource Control Board. So, I would say about 6 months.
So we'd still be pushing the envelope on having coverage. My thought process is if
Well, and it really all depends on when the program is released, and you normally have a few months before the deadline, and then they have a few months to review, and it goes along that process. So it depends on when the program's released. Deadlines aren't as aggressive as our State Water Resource Control Board, and Bureau of Rec, but, and I don't think, unlike some of the others, they don't wait to allocate the funding, so. Best guess, 6 months.
So while you're all thinking, can I get some clarification on what your contracting out option is? Are you considering renting the vehicles or contracting a vendor just to provide the vehicles on an as-needed basis, or contracting out the entire service? Because remember, in California, there are only certain things we can contract out. And even those, we have to go through a fairly extensive meet and confer process with the union. So you would have to build that into any process with regard to contracting out the service. At this point in time, I'm not even sure it's one of the services that can be contracted out. It's not a service we're looking for the county, and it's not a professional or specialty service, but I'm not certain what exactly the trucks are used for, so I can't say from here whether it falls into one of the categories. That would be something that I would work with Chris, Mr. Lopez, on his analysis. We'd talk about that. We'll have an answer for you on that. I just wanted to make sure that's what we were looking at.
And that's what we need. I mean, we need to know that. We need to know what we can do legally and what we cannot do, and where we can go to try to save some funding.
I'm going to try to float this out, that we approve the acquisition of one vehicle now and ask staff to research some of the options, explore the grants, and what other viable options that we've discussed, and bring that back at the earliest convenient council meeting and see where that falls. So I guess my motion would be to let's acquire one vehicle now and determine which is the one that we want to dispose of most readily, and so we start moving on that process and then reevaluate when it comes back to us. If that makes sense in a motion.
We can,
He used 2 different dates. He said December and then when it comes back to us. Are you asking a date specific?
Well, the first one was at the earliest.
Yeah, the earliest opportunity that staff can bring it back.
So there's a motion. Is there a second? Not hearing a second, that motion dies.
Let me do some research and find out when the next solicitations are out.
Okay. Is that a motion?
That's a statement.
and I think,
If I may, one of the things that Kathy just came up and showed me, it does look like solicitations are going to be out at the beginning of 2019 for Carl Moyer. That was the next. They're closed currently.
That's right, because we missed them.
and the thing is, I mean, if it's an 11-month lead time to get these things approved, we can wait till January to have all of the information for us at a January council meeting and still meet that 11-month deadline for when CARB tells us we can't drive our cars or vehicles anymore.
Assuming the CARB police are going to be in here.
The CARB police are everywhere. They're by the electric meters over at City Hall.
And while this is sad and it makes us feel like we're just Grinches up here, the fact is that you've saved money for how many years for this vehicle?
And so we have to think ahead on the grants too. And we talk too much about it, and I've already said it, but I just have to say it again. I feel bad that we have to do this, but we have talked about it for 2 years. At least I have.
Yes, please.
I'll make a motion that we continue this item until January council meeting when Chris Lopez works his magic and comes back with numbers.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, please vote. Okay, that passes 4-1. Okay. You're up again, item 14.
I
Amendment
am.
to the agreement
No, I
with
haven't.
Bartle Wells Associates.
So, as you all know, we have a grant for $400,000 almost for our water study. And we've been working on the water
Now I
study.
think you're talking everybody's language.
Okay. We've been working on the water rate study for quite a while. The grant came out back in 2016. We've had some challenges with delays in terms of getting information that we need to look at moving to a water efficiency rate, a tiered rate that kind of establishes different water budgets, if you will. I know that sounds worse than it is, but it's not. We've been working with Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority on this. We've been working with various consultants free through them, as well as our own GIS consultant here and our rate consultant, Bartle Wells. So we had hoped to be complete with the analysis by now, but we are not. We've, like I said, had some hiccups in data. We've had some delays with our very own billing system, customer service help. So we have expended the original contract amount that we established with Bartle Wells, which was, I think it was $44,560. We are asking for an additional $35,000 to get us through the end of this process. We don't think that we will need it all. We do have the grant funding available to cover it, but at this point, we do need to extend the contract. That would take the not to exceed amount to, I've hid it from myself, $79,560 for the full contract. So we've brought an amendment forward to council that would add that $35,000 to the compensation amount, as well as extend the contract through the end of June. And we do anticipate having the rates, with the approval of this, having the rates in front of council in January. So happy to answer any questions.
Questions for staff? Seeing none. Is there anybody in the public that wishes to speak on this item? Seeing nobody rush the mic. What do you want to do? Okay. There's a motion and a second. Please vote.
Thank you, council.
All right, that passes.
And I am out of here.
Item 15, Measure U Committee Recruitment, City Attorney Bill.
Mayor and council members, tonight the clerk and I would like to ask that you allow us to go through the process to start selecting new members for your oversight committee or reappointing existing members, should that be your preference. You'll remember that in 2016 the voters passed Measure U. Measure U is essentially an ordinance of the city that creates a sales and use tax. As part of Measure U, an oversight committee was included in the measure. In the municipal code, you can find the requirements for the oversight committee in section 74-145. Even though it's an ordinance and it's in our municipal code, since it was adopted by the voters,
We have to adhere to what it says, and we aren't able to change what it says. Luckily enough, the requirements aren't very difficult to appoint new or retain existing board members. We're bringing this to you now because the existing terms of your committee members will expire on February 13th, 2019. We recommend that you have a 30-day solicitation and application period, and then take the month of January to go through review of applications and interviews. We would suggest that you give the clerk direction to post the notice of interest or solicitation of applications, that you establish a closing date for the submittal of applications as of December 20th, 2018, and that you set dates for council interviews of applicants and appointment to the committee. The clerks provided some suggested dates for you in January, including Tuesday, January 8th or Tuesday, January 22nd. And then should you decide to appoint new members, you can direct at this time or subsequently that city manager or his staff hold an orientation for new members. The board consists, or the committee consists of 7 members. 4 of those members must be city residents. 3 of those members may be, but don't have to be, either residents in the city's sphere of influence or owners of businesses that have their primary location within the city of Hemet. Currently, you have 7 existing members. Their terms will expire on the 13th of February. They are eligible to be reappointed. The members would have to fill out an application again, even though they've done one before. And it would be your decision whether to re-interview them. They have been re-interviewed in public before once, but you could re-interview them again. The ordinance and the measure require the application solicitation process. They require the filing of an application, and they require that the full city council review the applications and interview the potential committee members and to make your selection in a public meeting. It can be more than one public meeting. You'll remember last time it went on for quite some time, and we probably will need to have a subsequent meeting to decide exactly how you want to select your members. But right now, we just need to get the process moving. I do believe it's possible that if you wanted to reappoint one or more of the existing members, that they wouldn't need to re-interview, although clearly the ordinance, the measure says you'll interview people. It doesn't say that you have to re-interview people every time. It does say that you have to redo the notice and redo application. So that's up for you to decide. I can answer additional questions about the measure or the process if you would like. Otherwise, we'd be happy if you would make staff recommendation.
I have a question for you. Is there a way for us to stagger, because it seems odd that, and I understand this is new, but every 2 years everybody's up. It would be wise to have it like half and half or something.
Most of our committees are staggered. That's not the way the measure was written and approved by the voters. Everybody selected at one time and all their terms end at one time. And unfortunately, we can't change it.
Well, I think it's important to keep a couple that continue, that know have the history, where it's been, and it's never a bad idea to get new blood too. So,
Do we have any sense of how many of the existing committee members are interested in continuing? I've been contacted by at least one who has expressed an interest in remaining another term. So I don't know if that's representative of all of the committee members. Some of them may want to step away, but I think it would be helpful to me to have some sense of how many would like to continue on, And that would streamline the process for filling the seats of those who want to step away.
I would think that if we move forward with staff's recommendation or the city attorney's recommendation, that if the existing members want to stay, they can apply just like I had to when I was on the planning commission every time my seat came up. I think that's probably the best way to go, and that'll give us all a sense of who wants to stay and who thinks they did their duty. So I...
Okay, before you vote, Council, we might need to ask for council comment, or comments.
So this is a discussion item, so is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak on this item?
And council members, just like I send your commissioners, they'll all get a letter, they'll all know their term is expiring, they'll all get an application, be invited to apply.
Great.
And nothing's not you reaching out to any one or more of the
Very good. All right, since nobody rushed the microphone, I'll bring it back to you.
I move the staff recommendation.
Oh, you beat me to it. I'll second it. Please vote.
So I do need to pick your dates in January for the application, so, or do that.
We should probably review them on the first date, just in case we need to do it again on the second date.
And then, sorry, who said that?
I did. So that's the January 8th meeting? Okay. All right. Lorena, you're next. Fiscal year end 2017-18 review and quarterly update as of September 30th, 2018.
Good evening. So what I'm bringing you tonight is the preliminary fiscal year end 17-18. The numbers are still unaudited while the auditors have been on site looking at all of our entries and invoices and whatnot. We still have not had the CAFR issued. So these are preliminary numbers and they can change at any time. For the general fund, and this is excluding Measure U, the general fund revenues totaled $40,197,000. That is up 5.2% over last year. Most of the revenue categories were up over last year, but small amounts, 50,000 in some, 100,000 in others. The biggest increase was in property taxes, and that includes the vehicle and lieu fees, which was up 7.7%. So in dollars, that was about $900,000 of the total increase in the general fund revenues. On the expenditure side, the general fund expenditures were $42,044,000, about $900,000 below budget. Main reasons for this is there are still several vacancies in several departments, and department heads are constantly looking to control costs within their departments so as not to exceed those numbers. Looking at the two together, though, general fund expenditures did exceed revenues by $1.8 million. This is mainly due to the cost of the MOU agreements with the safety units. While we did still meet the 20% reserve requirement for the year, the amount that we have left in the general fund that's not reserved, not set aside for anything else, it's not the 20%, it's not the fees or anything like that, is $20,000. In 16-17, we had $1.6 million left over. So just a comparison.
Say that again.
The general fund's non-reserved available fund balance. That means anything in excess of Measure U's fund balance set aside, PEG fees set aside, or 20% set aside is $20,000. Last year's non-reserved fund balance was $1.6 million. That's almost what we were over this year, what our expenditures exceeded our revenues by. On the Measure U side, we budgeted $10 million for revenues. Fortunately, we did a lot better in that. Revenues received were $11,096,000, and that does include the cleanup payment that we received in August. Normally, we receive it in September, and so we don't accrue it. So this year is kind of an anomaly because it has last year's last true-up and the current year's. But this is the year where it switched, and I did talk to our auditors about that. They said most cities are just booking it in the year that it was received and just accepting it for what it is, and then next year it'll go back to normal where we'll only have the one true-up payment at the end of the year. On the expenditure side, for police and fire together, they spent $5,345,000. That means that Measure U received $5,751,000 more in revenues than they spent. That will be added to their fund balance that they had last year of $1.2 million, bringing them up to $6.9 million in fund balance to be used only for Measure U. So this is the breakdown of the fund balance. $16,771,000 is what we started with. We have the 20% reserve requirement, the PEG fees that came out of there, and the Measure U reserve. And we have the unreserved fund balance of $20,000. And I do think I have a correction in there because I know I just mentioned the Measure U reserve was 6.9. So I may have a correction in the PEG fees. I apologize, but I know the unreserved is correct of $20,000. I can answer any questions about the fiscal year 17-18 if you'd like before we go into 18-19 first quarter. Just continue? Okay. For the first quarter of the current year, 18-19, not a lot of surprises. We are on track. Revenue is up 5% over the same period last year. It really just has to do with the timeliness of a property tax payment that we received, which was higher than the one we received last year. We don't normally receive property tax payments until January, or the big payments start coming in January, so usually the first half of the year is very slow on the revenue side. Revenues are at 10.22 of the annual budgeted amount. This is normal for the year. Sales tax revenues are approximately 2 months behind, so we won't really see that catch up until the end of the year, but it is on track. Same thing for Measure U transactions. The transactions tax, the majority of the property tax receipts, again, are received in the second half of the fiscal year, so when I bring back the third quarter is when you'll see the big jumps in the numbers. And this is just a breakdown of where our revenues are coming in from. We have other taxes and fees, Measure U, sales tax, property taxes. Right now, the other taxes and fees is what has been most consistent and a little bit above where we should be at for this time of year, which is about 25%. Those taxes are things like TOT, franchise taxes, things like that, which come in consistently. On the expenditure side, the departments continue to hold the line on expenditures. Our expenditures are on target at 24% year to date. And remember that this does include already the $3.5 million that we were able to take out of the budget to make sure that we passed a balanced budget. So this is 24% at this lower amount. Measure U expenditures are below budget. They're at 13.58, mainly due to vacancies that they still have. I believe the majority of them are in the police department. And this is a breakdown of Expenditures, I know it's hard to read that, but that big red portion is police, general fund police. The green one at the bottom is police measure U. The blue to the left is the fire department, and the small dark green just up above it is the fire measure U. So as you can see, we still continue to maintain that minimum 72% requirement for measure U. In the water fund, the revenues are at 19.14% of projected. Expenditures are at 10.68. This is still in line with this time of year. It's very typical. Low expenditures are mainly due to a lot of projects that we still have that are in the planning stages, and they do have several vacancies in that department as well. There isn't any specific action that we need tonight other than to receive and file the report, and I can answer any questions that you may have.
So it's November. What kind of deficit are we looking at for next year at this rate?
If we can stick to our numbers and our revenues come in as projected, which I'm pretty confident they will, because sales tax seemed to be a little bit higher than last year. And if we can hold the line on our expenditures, we should be okay. But we also have to remember that for 18-19, your 20% reserve requirement is going to be significantly lower than 17-18's was, because you're taking 20% of a smaller amount. So it's about a $500,000 difference. I know I looked at it last week, and it's about a $500,000 difference. So at the end of 18-19, assuming revenues come in as projected and expenditures are within our budget, we should be just fine as far as the 20% reserve, but our balances will be lower. But we always have increases to PERS. We did already get our PERS rates for 18-19, and the safety side of it, the normal cost is going up 3%. For safety, 3%.
Well, that's less than we thought.
What's that?
That's less than what we thought.
Oh, that's just the normal cost.
Yeah.
And then you have an additional almost $300,000 on the unfunded liability portion, which is that piece, that big chunk that we pay at the beginning of the year. And then on the miscellaneous side, it actually increased a lot less. The increase to the miscellaneous, I believe, was somewhere around 0.5% for normal cost, and the unfunded liability was only about $80,000 for miscellaneous employees. But there's still a lot of unknowns. We don't know what healthcare is going to be. While there's caps for our employees, there aren't caps for our retirees, and those increases will be direct hits to all funds, not just the general fund.
So, all that being said, a guesstimate of what our deficit may be next year. I want a number.
For 19-20? I've actually kind of tried to put that into spreadsheets and whatnot, which is what I do. And it's just under $5 million. It's about $4.7 million. Where this current year we started at $3.5 million. But you have to remember that any increases that are in there for PERS, for liability insurance, our liability insurance will go up because we have more vehicles. Our workers' comp will go up because we have more employees. Anytime we're purchasing more equipment, whether it's vehicles, computers, anything like that, all of the insurance